You pour the bag into the pan, and for a second, it looks perfect. Plump, glassy, curled tight, that clean pink shine the package promised. Then the pan starts to fill. A thin, milky water rises around the shrimp, and instead of searing, they start to poach in it. You watch them shrink. What covered the bottom of the pan a minute ago now huddles in the center, half the size, rubbery at the edge. You paid for a pound. You are cooking about 12 ounces of actual shrimp, and you are cooking it in the rest. You didn't overcook anything. You didn't buy the cheap one. That water was in the bag before you opened it, and it was sold to you by weight, at shrimp prices. Here's the part nobody puts on the front of the package. With frozen shrimp, the front is a photograph, and the truth is in 3 lines of small print. On the back, the ingredient list, the country of origin, and the net weight. Almost nobody reads all 3. The people who profit from that are counting on it. So we did read them. We went through frozen shrimp from 11 stores, the store brands you grab without thinking, and the national names you assume are safer. We didn't taste our way to a ranking. Every claim here comes straight off the label, the recall notice, or the federal import record. And the pattern that came back was almost funny in how consistent it was. The more the bag reassured you wild, Gulf, premium, no chemicals added, the less any of it held up when you turned it over. The most trusted bag on this list is the one that told you the most and verified the least. Let's start at number 8. For years, the story on shrimp was simple. Wild was the good one. Farmed was the shortcut. Then farmed shrimp got cheap enough to take over the entire freezer aisle, and the labels quietly rewrote themselves to sound like the thing they replaced. Before we start, one honest note. Nothing on this list is going to hurt you tonight. Farmed shrimp is legal, it's inspected at the border, and most of it is fine to eat. This isn't about danger, it's about what you're actually paying for, and how much of the story the label is allowed to leave off. Those are 2 different questions, and the aisle blurs them on purpose. Number 8 is the bag with no story at all, the deep discount store shrimp, the Aldi-style bag under names like Fremont Fish Market or Sea Queen. It is not trying to fool you with a heritage. It's just cheap, and the price is the whole pitch. Turn it over, and you'll usually find 3 things. Farm-raised, a country in Southeast Asia, and, tucked into the ingredients, sodium tripolyphosphate. That last one is worth learning, because you're going to see it again and again tonight. Sodium tripolyphosphate, STPP, is a salt the processor soaks the shrimp in before freezing. In the trade they call the result wet shrimp. It does 2 things. It makes the shrimp look firmer and glassier, and it makes them absorb water, usually 7 to 10% more weight, sometimes more. You are buying that water by the pound. The bag isn't lying. It just let the chemistry do the lying for it. And there's a catch. The processor doesn't advertise. Push the soak too far, and the phosphate starts reacting with the natural fats in the shrimp. The same reaction that turns fat into soap. That faint metallic, soapy note some frozen shrimp leaves on your tongue isn't your cooking. It's the chemistry finishing in your mouth. The firmer and glassier a bargain bag looks, the harder it usually had to be soaked to get there. Number 7 is the one most of this country actually has in the freezer right now. The Walmart Great Value Bag. Store brands feel like the honest choice. No marketing budget, no inflated name, just shrimp. But the store brand isn't a farm. It's a sticker. Whoever had capacity that month packed it, and the bag reflects it. This is the shrimp reviewers describe releasing so much liquid the pan turns to soup, the signature of a heavy phosphate soak, plus a thick ice glaze meeting heat. Now the second word for tonight, glaze. Glaze is the layer of ice frozen onto the shrimp to protect it. It's normal, it's legal, and it should be excluded from the net weight. Federal guidance allows up to 15% glaze by weight. But when independent tests weighed real bags, more than a fifth of them blew past that limit, and the small count shrimp averaged almost 19% ice. The rule is actually on your side here, in theory. The glaze is supposed to be excluded from the net weight. The legal term is deglazed, or drained. Weight, so the number on the front should be shrimp only. In practice, enforcement is thin and the declarations are inconsistent, which is how one bag can look cheaper per pound than the one beside it, simply by counting more of its ice. So before the shrimp even touches your pan, a chunk of what you carried out of the store was frozen water. On a cheap bag, that's the whole margin. Put a number on it. If a $5 bag is a fifth ice and soaked another 10% with water, close to a third of that $5 bought you nothing but frozen water dressed up as seafood. Do that every week for a year, and the aisle has quietly sold you pounds of water at shrimp prices. If this is already changing how that freezer door looks to you, a quick like helps push it in front of the next person standing there, choosing between two bags. Number 6 is Gorton's, and here the water problem turns into something more honest about what you're really buying. Gorton's leans breaded, the popcorn shrimp, the crunchy butterfly shrimp. Once you bread and batter a shrimp, the math changes completely. Now the weight on the front is shrimp, plus breading, plus batter, plus the glaze under it. Reviewers keep landing on the same two words for the shrimp inside rubbery, and missing that natural sweetness, because by the time you strip the coating, there isn't much shrimp left, and what's there was small and soaked to begin with. This is where the title of this video stops being a figure of speech. On a breaded bag, half the weight really can be everything that isn't shrimp. The coating is the product, the shrimp is the excuse to sell it, and breading is where the label law gets generous. There's no rule that a breaded shrimp has to be mostly shrimp. The coating, the batter, and the glaze underneath all count toward the weight on the front. Strip a handful down to the actual pink meat and weigh what's left. And on the worst bags you're holding a fraction of what you paid for most of it, flour and water browned, to look like dinner. If you're keeping a running list in your head, you've now met the two levers that quietly move weight from your plate to your receipt. The soak that adds water and the glaze that adds ice. The next few bags don't invent new tricks. They just dress them up in nicer fonts. The next one sells you the ocean it was never anywhere near. Number 5 is CPAC, the coconut shrimp, the shrimp scampi kits, the bag that photographs like a restaurant appetizer. It's a good example of how the picture on the front does the persuading. A golden, oversized, perfectly curled shrimp in a beauty-lit close-up. The shrimp in the bag is farm-raised, imported, breaded, and glazed. And the coating carries most of the flavor by design, because if the shrimp itself tasted like much, you'd notice how little of it there is. There's nothing unsafe here. There's just a photograph doing a job the shrimp can't. And these kits lean on a second bit of misdirection: the sauce. Scampi butter, a coconut crust, a packet of seasoning that goes in the pan first. Flavor that loud up front means you're tasting the kit, not the shrimp, and that is the whole plan when the shrimp underneath is small, imported, and soaked. The better the sauce hides the star, the less the star had to be. Number 4 is chicken of the sea, and this one is about a different kind of tell. Watch which brands are permanently on sale. Chicken of the sea shrimp seems to be discounted almost every week, and a product that's always marked down is usually telling you where it sits on the quality ladder before you ever open it. It's owned by one of the largest seafood conglomerates on Earth, sourced from the same overseas farms, feeding half this list, cooked and glazed and phosphate treated like the rest. The brand name is old and comforting. The supply chain behind it is the exact one everything else here runs on. That's worth sitting with for a second. A shelf that looks like a dozen competing brands, The value bag, the premium bistro line, the old comforting name, is very often the same few overseas processors packing under different stickers for different price tiers. You think you're choosing between companies. A lot of the time you're choosing between labels on the same truck. Number 3 is the bag I hinted at in the beginning, and it's the one that should make you angriest because this is where the label crosses from leaving things out to actively pointing you the wrong way. It's the Kroger Private Selection line, sold as wild-caught Argentinian, the premium tier store brand, the one with the dark packaging and the higher price, positioned as the upgrade. In taste tests, it lands at or near the bottom, mushy texture, a heavy fishy smell that takes over the dish. But forget the taste for a second, because the word to watch is wild. In 2014, the ocean group Oceania ran DNA tests on 143 shrimp products from 111 stores and restaurants. 30% were misrepresented. And of everything sold as wild or Gulf, 30% was actually farmed, most often plain farmed white-leg shrimp wearing a wild costume. Here's how that swap actually happens. White-leg is the cheap farmed workhorse of the industry, grown by the ton in ponds. Cooked, bagged, and labeled with the right adjective, it's nearly impossible to tell from a genuine wild catch by eye, which is the whole reason the substitution is so common and so rarely caught. It takes a lab and a DNA test to prove, and no shopper is running one at the freezer door. In some cities it was worse, 43% in New York. So when a bag leans on the word wild, that word is doing marketing, not verification, which sets up a number that should stop you cold. Here's the arithmetic the aisle would rather you never do. Americans eat around 5 pounds of shrimp per person every year, and more than 90% of it is imported overwhelmingly farmed, from Vietnam, India, China, Thailand, and Central America. Domestic wild shrimp, the real Gulf catch, is somewhere between 4 and 10% of what we eat. Now hold those two facts next to each other. There is only a tiny sliver of genuinely wild American shrimp in existence, but wild and Gulf are plastered across a huge share of the freezer aisle. The supply doesn't exist to back the label. You don't need to catch a single company lying. The country cannot physically be eating as much wild shrimp as it's being sold. The word got printed anyway. Which brings us to number 2, and number 2 is about the second word on the back that almost nobody checks: the country of origin. These are the bistro and premium store lines, the waterfront bistro type of bag from the big grocery chains, dressed to look like a seafood counter. The front says bistro, the back says a farm on the other side of the world, raised in ponds, soaked, glazed, and flown in. And this is the loophole that makes the whole thing work. Country of origin labeling applies to the raw bag on the shelf, but it's waived for restaurants and for a lot of processed products. So the same imported farmed shrimp that has to confess its origin in the freezer aisle can legally become Gulf shrimp on a menu 2 miles away. The bag at least tells you the truth in small print. The plate never has to. Which leaves one bag, the one you'd have bet was the exception. And that leaves number 1, the bag most of you trust the most, which is exactly why it's here. Number 1 is the Costco Kirkland Signature Shrimp. I want to be fair, because Kirkland has earned a real reputation, and this shrimp is not dangerous. But look at what the premium halo is quietly buying you. The bag says, product of Vietnam. It says, farm-raised. And in the most reassuring line of all, it says, no preservatives, no chemicals added, the phrase that makes a careful shopper exhale and stop reading. Now the part that isn't on the front. Costco's shrimp has been supplied by Cater Exports, an Indian seafood processor, and back in 2020, Kirkland shrimp was recalled over a salmonella risk. That same processor has turned up in FDA citations for banned antibiotics and veterinary drug residues in its shrimp, the nitrofurans I mentioned earlier, a class of antibiotics that isn't allowed in shrimp sold here at all. To be precise, those refusals happen at the border, on specific shipments. They are not proof that any bag you bought was contaminated. But that's the point. The most trusted shrimp in the country is still pond-raised on the other side of the world, run through the same global supply chain as everything below it, wearing a "no chemicals added" label that quietly means we didn't add the phosphate, not none of this was ever near a chemical. Read that phrase like a lawyer, because a lawyer wrote it. No chemicals added is a claim about the last step, the soak, and skipping the phosphate is genuinely the better choice, so credit where it's due. But it says nothing about the pond it was raised in, the feed, the water treatment, or what the FDA is screening for at the dock. It answers the one question that sounds scary and stays silent on the 5 that actually vary. Nowhere on this list does the gap between what you assume and what you can verify open up wider than here, on the bag you trusted without checking. Now pause the countdown, because none of this is an accident, and it didn't start with any one brand. Go back about 40 years. In the 1980s, roughly half the shrimp Americans ate was caught by American boats. Then farmed shrimp from Asia and Latin America got cheap enough, with the help of foreign subsidies, to flood the market and undercut every domestic dock. It got contentious enough that the U.S. has carried anti-dumping duties on imported shrimp from several of these countries for years, a formal finding that the product was being sold below fair cost. The duties didn't bring the docks back. By the time they landed, the aisle had already been rebuilt around cheap imports, and the American boats still tying up were competing against a product engineered to look like theirs at a fraction of the price. Today, that domestic share is under 10%. Once the supply became overwhelmingly cheap farmed imports, 3 things had to follow. The imports needed to look premium, so the labels borrowed the language of the wild catch they'd replaced. The cheap product needed margin, so the soak and the glaze turned water into billable weight. And the origin needed to blur, so the loopholes stayed open and the certifications stayed cosmetic. That last one matters. A lot of these farms carry a BAP certified seal best aquaculture practices, and yet FDA border refusals for banned antibiotics keep coming from BAP certified processors. In 2024 alone, the FDA turned away 81 shipments of shrimp for banned drugs, most of them from India and Vietnam, and the numbers have climbed since. The seal is real. What it guarantees is thinner than it sounds. Before we get to the ones worth buying, let me take away a test you've probably trusted, because it's leading you in exactly the wrong direction. You've heard that good shrimp should look glassy, plump, and firm, that the shine means fresh, that the snap means quality. Flip that. The vitreous shine and the artificial firmness are, more often than not, the phosphate soak doing its job. STPP exists to make shrimp look firmer and glassier than they are. So the bag you're picking because it looks the most premium may just be the one that was soaked the hardest. Your eyes were trained by the exact thing you're trying to avoid. So what actually passes? The same 3 questions that sank everything above what's in it, where it's from, and how much of it is water, are the questions that lift the winners up. First, Trader Joe's Argentinian red shrimp. These are genuinely wild-caught, cold-water shrimp from the Patagonian coast, and the ingredient line is usually just shrimp and salt. One caveat in the name of honesty. Trader Joe's is owned by the Aldi Nord side of the Albrecht family, so it's not a scrappy little grocer, it just happens to source a real product and print a short label. The reason those Argentine reds can be honestly wild is boring and physical. They come from cold Patagonian waters, where large-scale shrimp farming isn't the model. So on that bag, wild caught is a description, not a marketing choice. That's the tell for a real one. The best claim on the label is backed by where the animal actually lives, not by an adjective someone picked in a design meeting. Second, actual U.S. wild Gulf shrimp, the bags that carry a genuine wild American shrimp certification, where the catch is domestic and traceable to a port. It costs more, and now you know why. You're paying for shrimp instead of for water and a costume. And the traceability is the product. As much as the shrimp is a real domestic bag, can usually tell you the species, the region it was landed, and sometimes the fishery, because a boat that actually caught it has nothing to hide about where. When a label can afford to be that specific, that specificity is itself the proof. Third, and this is the one that matters, even if you never buy any brand I've named, any bag whose ingredient list reads shrimp, salt, that names the specific body of water it came from, and that says nothing about phosphates. The winner isn't a fancier brand, it's the bag that hides the least. It passes for the same reason the others failed. It told you the truth in all 3 lines, instead of just the pretty one. So here's what you can do tonight, without trusting me or anyone else. Test 1, and it's the only one you really need. Read the ingredient list. Real shrimp is shrimp, and maybe salt. If you see sodium tripolyphosphate, STPP, or sodium phosphate, you're holding wet shrimp water was added, and you're buying it by the pound. Test 2, the one that turns the abstract into a number. Weigh the bag frozen, then thaw it, drain it, and weigh it again. The difference is the glaze and the water you paid shrimp prices for. Do it once, and you'll never look at 1 pound the same way. Test 3, at the pan. If a milky white liquid floods out and the shrimp collapse to half their size, they were soaked. That last one isn't proof on its own. A little moisture is normal, but stacked on a phosphate ingredient line, it's the confession finishing itself. And if you're at a counter, instead of a freezer, you get to ask the one question that cuts through all of it. Are these wet or dry? A good fishmonger will know exactly what you mean. That question alone tells them you're not the shopper this system was built for. A few quick things people get wrong, so you don't trade one myth for another. Frozen isn't worse than fresh. Most fresh shrimp at the counter was frozen and thawed anyway, and refreezing it at home is the real mistake. Farmed isn't automatically bad, and wild isn't automatically clean. The issue is that the label rarely lets you tell which you're holding. Bigger shrimp aren't a better deal by default. That's what the count number means, the shrimp per pound, and a lower count just means larger animals, not better ones, and often more glaze packed around them. And no preservatives is not the same as no added water. A bag can skip the phosphate and still be sold under a thick coat of ice. And one more, the price doesn't sort this out for you. A higher price can mean better shrimp, or it can just mean a better photograph and a heavier premium sticker on the same imported bag. Cost tracks the marketing at least as often as it tracks the shrimp. Here's the 5-second version, the part to keep. You now know that wild and Gulf are words the supply can't back up, because over 90% of our shrimp is imported and farmed. You know the glaze is ice that's supposed to be left out of the weight, and often isn't. You know sodium tripolyphosphate, the soak, turns water into billable pounds and fakes the firmness you were taught to trust. You know nitrofurans are the banned antibiotics the FDA keeps turning away at the border, BAP seal or not. You know country of origin has to be printed on the bag, but not on the menu. And you know the whole thing reads off 3 lines of back of package print. Ingredients, origin, net weight. Their entire model runs on the bet that you'll only ever look at the front. That bet is what just expired. If this changed how the freezer aisle looks to you, do one thing with it. Send it to the person who always grabs the wild-caught bag on the way to checkout, the one who thinks the premium sticker settled the question. They're the one this was built to reassure, and they're the one who most needs to turn the bag over.